Dr. Dawson Church, this has been one of the interviews that I have anticipated doing for such a long time. I've been wanting to have you on my podcast for years, and I am so thrilled and honored to talk to you. You have inspired me, my career. I discovered you around 2013, and I was even more excited to know we're both fellow South Africans. So I just knew immediately that, well, you just, your brilliance is very evident, and having that common background is wonderful. You have such an incredible expertise and background and research skills and qualifications, and you help millions around the world. And it's an absolute honor and pleasure to interview you. And I know you're going to help so many people across the board today. So welcome.
It's a joy to be here, Caroline.
Oh, well, it's a joy to talk to you. So you're going to tell them a bit more about you, but I'm just going to tell people that Dawson is a best-selling science writer and author of 3 award-winning books. They are outstanding books. I have all of them, and I've studied them from cover to cover. The Gene in Your Genes broke new ground by showing that gene expression is influenced by emotions. Mind to Matter is based on hundreds of studies showing that our brains play a key role in constructing the reality around us, and that's something I really want to get into. In Bliss Brain, he demonstrates that as we cultivate peak states, our brains rapidly rewire themselves for happiness. I want to get into that. It's so beautiful. He's the founder of the Veteran Stress Solution, which has offered free PTSD treatment to over 22,000 veterans. Incredible. After retiring from active business management, Dawson has continued to teach and inspire through his presentations, podcasts, books, and blog posts. And I follow Joe Dispenza as well, and I know he's a good friend of yours. And he has a quote about you. It's actually in the foreword of Mind to Matter, and it's so beautiful. I wanted to read it. Dawson is one of those people I can email or call and ask, how long does it take for trauma to consolidate in the brain as a long-term memory? And he will, without hesitation, tell me the exact time it takes, the best references, the particular research studies, as well as the scientists who conducted these studies. It's as if he were giving me directions to the local supermarket. When I discovered this, that's when I realized I was not working with an average scientist. I was in the presence of a supermind. Dawson is brilliant, charismatic, loving, and full of life, and I cannot agree more. So once again, welcome. And Dawson, would you like to just tell the audience a little bit about your background? It's so extensive, what you do, big overview, and then we'll dive into some science and then some practical stuff.
Yeah, and for me, this has just been the outgrowth of curiosity. Like, how do things work and why? And so you ask those big questions. And of course, we all ask those big questions about our own lives. Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Why is my life the way it is? And I began very much the same way as a teenager and really pondering all of these questions and finding answers initially in psychology, spirituality. And then when the whole field of energy medicine began to become popular in the mid-1980s, so acupuncture, acupressure, thought field therapy, various kinds of mind to matter therapies began to become popular, I got curious about them, began to study them, and then eventually realized that they had a huge potential for healing. And that quantification was powerful. In the first study I published in a journal called Integrative Medicine, a big medicine journal, peer-reviewed journal, we looked at the mental health, the anxiety and depression among a group of mental health professionals and medical professionals, doctors, nurses, psychologists, chiropractors, and we gave them a one-day workshop on releasing their stress. And our discovery was that they were, between the morning and the afternoon data points, they were releasing 45% of their anxiety and depression symptoms just using energy therapies. And that study done in the early 2000s really made an impression on me. It was my own data. In fact, I was so startled, Caroline. I was working with the University of Arizona, and I emailed them back once they sent me the Excel spreadsheet. I said, would you guys mind checking your data? Because something's clearly wrong here. Nothing in psychology or spirituality suggests that you can have a 25% reduction in anxiety and depression in one day. But they emailed me back and said, absolutely, that's the data. And they were able to show, we were eventually able to show in multiple studies, multiple replications of that study, that's a normal result from applying energy. So that allowed us to quantify it. And I then got into the biology of that. I said, if our anxiety and depression is going down, then our cortisol must be dropping. So I did the first big study of cortisol again around 2008, 2009, began to collect data from 5 sites on that, found a huge, massive drop in cortisol in just 1 hour of treatment with emotional freedom techniques and energy therapy based on acupuncture, much greater reduction, actually twice the reduction in anxiety and depression using talk therapy. So that again gave me hard data. Then did more clinical trials looking at the gene expression of people who were getting better, found that all kinds of genes were changing their expression, then looked at little particles called microRNAs that stick to genes and either silence them or promote them, found that those were improving, especially ones to do with anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress. And so it's just been a grand adventure for me following these breadcrumbs and having a ton of fun along the way.
And producing a lot of great work and changing people's lives as well. You talk about energy medicine. Would you mind defining that for my listeners and viewers?
Yeah, and if people want to see what the research looks like, there's a website that you can go to called energymedicinebibliography.com. And we define energy medicine on that site. That site, by the way, is a shortcut that lists hundreds and hundreds of research studies. And they are using energy medicine for cancer, for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's disease, for mental health issues. And they show that all of these therapies have an effect on those conditions. And so energy medicine these are therapies that explicitly are focused on the body's energy systems. And you can measure the body's energy systems very simply with devices like a galvanometer, skin galvanometer. You can measure them with an EEG. They change the electromagnetic field around the body, so you can measure them with an MRI. And we are electromagnetic beings. Things tend to happen at the energy level much, much quicker, much more immediately, long way before they're visible outside the body and in the field of matter. E equals mc squared. E comes first, energy, and then matter follows. So that's the definition, is that these are therapies that explicitly use energy to make a difference. And these are therapies like EFT, meditation can be classed as an energy therapy. You're changing your energy. And we see massive shifts on both the MRI and the EEG with certain kinds of meditation. Acupressure, acupuncture, both change the energy system of the body, often very, very quickly. Reiki, Jo-Ray, healing touch, laying on of hands, prayer is affecting people's energy and, again, those electromagnetic signatures of their bodies. So it's using things other than material approaches to healing. And again, that bibliography that our nonprofit has compiled shows that it affects all kinds of diseases. These are all downstream from energy.
And this is the big thing that I want to stress for the viewers and the listeners, is that we're talking here about evidence-based research, and Dawson has published extensively, and this, as you said, the energy field has published extensively. For the viewers that are familiar with my work, this is basically psychoneurobiology, mind-brain-body connection, which is what you're working in. So using the mind to change the brain and the body. So I just wanted to orientate my listeners there that this is what they're hearing all the time, but you're such an expert in such specific areas. And I would love to touch on, you say there's so many things that I want to ask you. It's going to take me hours to ask you. So I've only got an hour. And that's why I'm so excited. This is only part one. There's going to be many more parts that I hope you'll come back and share with us. But let's talk about epigenetics. It's very in at the moment, and it has been for a few years. And it's something that I think is really worth. You have a really good way of explaining it, and a very understandable way. Your gene in your genes. You have a whole section dedicated, a whole chapter. Could you, the ultimate epigenetic engineer? I love the name of that chapter. And I mean, it kind of links you with everything else and your work on genes and things. So however you want to approach it, but if you can maybe define it, talk a little bit about that. And it's a great way of understanding this whole concept of mind to matter, which is the name of your second book.
Yeah, and epigenetics is simply a change in gene expression that isn't dependent on changing the DNA. The DNA is the same, and yet a gene expresses or is silenced. It's turned on, it's turned off. And this is unlike that is a result of a change in DNA. So, for example, when species evolve, their DNA mutates and we see new species emerging over time. And so that's the way that species change over time based on DNA shifts. And actually, I was about to geek out to give you 5 examples, but I think I'll just leave it at that. We all know what gene change means. What is so interesting about epigenetic change is that it's happening without any change in the underlying genes. And one of the most fascinating examples of this were the studies by Rachel Yehuda on Holocaust survivors. And she found that the granddaughters of women who'd survived the Holocaust in the 1940s had the same epigenetic signaling as their granddaughters. Granddaughters and grandparents, grandmothers had the same epigenetic signaling as did the mothers. And so in 3 human generations, we find that these epigenetic shifts are persistent and are passed to subsequent generations. Other studies with mice and rats show them going 7 generations. And for example, fear. Fear can be passed along several generations in animal studies and presumably in humans as well. So you may be fearful of something. You may be anxious about something. You may be angry about something. And you may feel that anger in your body. It might feel very real to you. And it could actually just be an old epigenetic pattern from your great grandfather who was stressed because he was fighting in the American Civil War, or because he was a pioneer, or because he was a really hostile environment in one of the wars in Scandinavia in the 1700s. So we have all of these epigenetic tags, which are often driving our current behavior. And a lot of these energy therapies are able to remove those. In that one study I mentioned, we were studying veterans. It was a randomized controlled trial of veterans with high levels, chronic, clinical PTSD. They had flashbacks, they had nightmares, they had intrusive thoughts, they had hypervigilance. After 10 sessions of this energy therapy called EFT, their symptoms dropped dramatically. They dropped over 50%. And these symptoms normalized in terms of symptom levels. Their gene expression changed. So how their genes were working changed. And those little epigenetic tags that were attached to their genes just popped off. It was absolutely amazing to see genetic tagging that is associated with depression just going away over the course of those 10 sessions. So these energy therapies are powerful, both at the level of things like neurotransmitters and hormones, norepinephrine, and all of the other array of stress and relaxation hormones. They go right down to the level of affecting us at the level of our gene expression.
It's incredible to know that there's such strong evidence showing that we really can get free of those generational things from, the epigenetics research that you've just described, which gives us such hope for being able to manage the struggles of life and manage those traumas that happen. They don't have to crush us. They are crushing, but there's ways through. And that's what your work has shown so dramatically. And the work that we do as well with my team as well. It's incredible. Dawson, this is incredible. There's so many directions we can go in, but I think to sort of bring this home, you've done a lot of research showing how we can influence our genome. You've mentioned the PTSD studies with veterans and so on, and the dramatic change and increase. You also work with people. You work with people on the stage. You'll be literally doing a workshop and people change. And so you've developed this EFT, emotional freedom technique. You also talk about meditation and tapping. So I'd love you to talk now about how you've taken taken your research and developed hands-on ways of helping people to be able to help themselves, and they can learn. We're going to find out all about where they can learn from you and get help from you. Do you want to start by explaining emotional freedom technique and then go into the details? Because you also say amazing things about meditation and why for some people it doesn't work and how you've got to adjust things, and you've got a lot to say around that. What is the easiest way for you to be able to help us understand emotional freedom techniques?
Emotional freedom techniques is a really widely used technique. We find that about 40 million people worldwide use it. There are well over 100 studies in English language peer-reviewed journals. There are over 100 studies in other countries, other languages, Tagalog, Arabic, Hindi, many other languages, as EFT studied all over the world. And it's phenomenally effective, and it's really, really quick. And it uses acupressure rather than acupuncture by having people tap to stimulate acupressure points. And these acupressure points are measurable. We can measure them with a skin galvanometer. They have a very particular energy signature, which separates them from the surrounding skin. And when we use EFT with people, we have them recall troubling memories. We also have them rate those memories on a scale of 0 to 10. Like one veteran I worked with had been in terrible battles in Iraq. And the worst day of his life, as he told it to me, was when a friend of his had been killed and he was given the job of cleaning the bloodstains off his friend's uniform so that the uniform could be sent back to this soldier's next of kin. And here he lost a friend, and now he had to clean this uniform, and the uniform smelled really, really bad. In fact, he was dipping the uniform in bleach, and he had to run out of the medic hut and hyperventilate fresh air and then run back in again because the smell was bad. So here it's triggering sights, sounds, memories, immense grief. And as he rated what he called the worst day of his life, it was a 10 out of 10 in terms of emotion. And I just had him tell those stories, and he was tapping on acupressure points while he told them. After doing that for about 30 minutes, and we really went into the details of the event, absolutely horrendous graphic details about the event. I'm actually telling you the PC version of it over here, because if I told you some of the real details, I'd re-traumatize some of the people listening. And so we went into those details, though, with him, the graphic details of the event. But we were tapping. So what we see in the brain in cases like that, if we have people hooked up to an EEG, we see that the emotional brain, the limbic system, is highly active. It's all lit up during the recall of memories like that. As we tap, it gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And after tapping with him for a little under half an hour, he could tell the whole story again at a zero. And it dissipated all of the emotion behind the story. And so the facts were still there. It didn't change anything about the facts, what had happened. He still had lost his friend. He still had that horrendous experience. And he was now calm about it. And in fact, he wound up saying afterwards, he said, it was an act of love. I'm so glad I was the one assigned to clean the uniform, because I could send that uniform back to his parents back in the US, and it had been blessed by what I did. And so his cognitive frame for the event had flipped completely, and he now was at a zero for the emotion around it. That's what EFT does. That's what combining triggering fight or flight and triggering the emotional brain and then adding acupressure, which calms us down, does. It depotentiates all of the fear in those memories. We still have the memories, but now they are minus the fear as we shift the energy around them with the acupressure.
Wow, it's incredible. And I've heard you explain on numerous occasions how this actually works, because you've described the basic board outline. How does tapping actually work? Because it's very popular now. Everyone's talking about tapping, but when I hear your explanation, it's one of the best that I've ever heard. Would you mind explaining how exactly it works?
So when we pair the recall of a triggering memory, whether it's a childhood memory, whether it's an adult trauma, when we pair that with a non-triggering stimulus, then something actually happens in our memory system. Normally, if you are thinking about the car crash, your mortgage being underwater, the terrible divorce, whatever it is that is troubling you, you think about that and you have a rise in cortisol, you have a rise in adrenaline, norepinephrine, just as though that thing were still happening. And the brain and mind can't tell the difference between an event you're recalling with vivid emotion and one that is actually happening. So when you're explaining the car crash and when you're really reliving the fear of it in the present moment, even though the car crash was 10 years ago, you're still triggering the release of cortisol and all of that biological activity. So that's what we have people do deliberately. And if you do that without an effective intervention like EFT, you re-traumatize yourself. You are lighting up all those neural pathways again. And we know that neurons that fire together, wire together. So you're making those neural pathways bigger and stronger, and you're having them fire more efficiently by retelling the story. If, though, you retell the story and you pair the retelling with a neutral or positive stimulus, like tapping. Tapping works well. Breathing works well. Doesn't work quite as well as tapping, but tapping we found works extremely effectively. Also, eye movements. We use eye movements in EMDR, use eye movements in EFT, and eye movements in tapping are incredibly effective at rewriting the hard drive of those memories in our brains. Now, once the memory system in our brain has this neutral stimulus of tapping eye movements paired with fight or flight in the memory, it realizes the memory is not a current threat to our survival. And it removes all of the epigenetic tagging, removes all of the salience. It changes that memory, and we reconsolidate that memory back into our hippocampus, back into the parts of our brain that hold those memories. That now it's just a memory. It's just a terrible thing that happened, but it's no longer an emotional terrible thing that happened. So people describe the death, they describe the divorce, they describe the time in combat, they can describe it still, and their emotion is not rising because that link between the two is broken. And now dozens of clinical trials show that when you break that link between the event and going to fight or flight physiologically, when you break that link one time, it's amazing. You test people 6 months, 12 months, even 2 years later, and we find this little neutral fight or flight response in response to the memory does not come back. So it's a permanent solution for these mental health issues.
And you say that you said something incredible, a permanent solution. And I want people just to hear what you're saying, because the traditional biomedical model that's been so dominant for the past 40 years, the messaging is if you have PTSD from any of these kinds of things, well, kind of that's it. And there's a lot of sort of external things like medication and so on involved. And it's a lot of talk therapy and a lot of different, it's always with you, and it doesn't ever, as you keep saying, we can re-traumatize ourselves. So what you're doing with what's happening with this kind of approach is that you're enabling people to take those tangled knots that were of networks that were driving them and weaken those and disentangle them and take all that energy out of them and all that negative energy out of them. As you say, the salience is reduced, and then they can then remember. I mean, nothing that's happened to us is ever going to go away, but you've changed what it looks like inside of you and therefore how it plays out into your future. So instead of just learning to live with it and kind of suppress it with the sort of diagnosis and medication in the current models, you're actually rewiring. And that's key. We talk about that on my podcast all the time in terms of this rewiring and getting free from it. But and you say that because we get stuck in our bodies and our minds have got to work through our bodies. And this is what your work is doing. It's helping us to get through the fog.
That's right. It literally is rewiring our brains. And that does take a while. Like, you don't just break a neural bundle immediately. And the work of Eric Kandel, who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine for this, shows that it takes a while, but the while isn't 5 years. The while is about 2 or 3 weeks before those neural bundles start to fall apart, which is really encouraging. So if you've been an angry, reactive person, and maybe you've been an angry, reactive person for 50 years, you've built a ton of neural wiring about that worldview and about that way of handling things. If you're a pessimist and you just are used to seeing the world through dark glasses, and you have something negative to say and a negative take on things. I was actually at a concert last night with my wife, and we were sitting next to a bunch of people, and one of the men there was like that. Everything that happened, he had some kind of negative, sarcastic spin on whatever was going on. And I have to tell my heart go out to the poor guy, because that's his worldview. It's so ingrained now in his neurobiology that he's not aware of it. It's unconscious, and it's moved to that level of just behavior. But the good news about it is, just as we form neural bundles rapidly, now we form neural bundles much more rapidly than we prune them. So every night when we're asleep, we spend these brief periods of time having vivid dreams. Our eyes are moving around in our head like crazy, rapid eye movement sleep. That's when our brains are firing and wiring, and we're creating new neural bundles. Then we drop back down into deep sleep. Our brains slow down dramatically into the slowest brainwave. Then we're pruning those neural bundles. So we fire a lot and wire a lot in that rapid eye movement sleep. We prune a lot in non-rapid eye movement sleep. But the pruning does go on. And we do prune away those neural pathways. So if you're learning something new, you're going to be firing and wiring, creating all this great new wiring in your head. Say, for example, you are that negative, pessimistic, angry, reactive human being, and you make a dramatic change. You say, I'm just going to fix myself. I'm making a different choice, and you make that resolution, and you get to meditate, begin to tap. Then what happens to those old neural bundles is interesting. You are forming new bundles, and the old bundles, after about 2 weeks, start to fall apart. And after a few months, the body has unpicked them. So you, after a while, don't even have the wiring for that anymore. So what we see, for example, in Tibetan monks and Christian and Franciscan nuns, after a while, is that the amygdala, which is one of the main stress parts of the brain, it sends a signal down into the body to go to fight or flight. The amygdala, after a while, begins to shrink in these monks and nuns. They aren't using the fire alarm of the brain anymore. And so that reactive part, that stress part, gets smaller. Another part that shrinks in these monks and nuns is the nucleus accumbens, a part of the brain that's highly active in cravings. So fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, cigarettes, alcohol, even chocolate, the nucleus accumbens is all lit up in people who are seeking reward, really active in addicts. And what happens in the monks and nuns is they're not addicted anymore. They're not compulsive anymore. The nucleus accumbens begins to shrink. You have a smaller brain hardware. What begins to grow is the executive centers of the brain. They grow. The emotion regulation centers of the brain grow. You are able to regulate negative emotion. You feel that anger is starting to come up, and you've got a handle on it. You've got a knob, a control, volume control in it, and you dial down your anger. When you build that part of the brain, it's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and it runs right from your prefrontal cortex all the way into your emotional brain. And it's just like a control knob. You can use it to dial down those negative emotions. When you use that control knob often enough, dialing down all that negative thinking, all that negative feeling, you also gain the ability to dial up positive ones. That's when you start to write poetry and sing songs and dance and play and laugh a whole lot more, because now you're dialing up all positive emotions as well. And that's what we find over time in people. So the really encouraging thing is that even if you have been an SOB your entire life and you've been miserable and angry and pessimistic and made the lives of those around you miserable by the contents of your mind, as you change, when you tap, when you meditate, when you pray, read inspirational books, listen to programs like this,
Yeah, absolutely.
you are changing your brain, and it starts with just 2 weeks. Those old neural pathways start to collapse.
Oh my gosh, I feel like goosebumps going everywhere. It's just like everything you're saying is just brilliantly explained and just so incredibly true. You're 38 years in the field too. I see this with our own research, and I'm so excited when you spoke about the neural bundles and taking around about 2 to 3 weeks. We found that in our research as well, that's the time that deconstruction, reconstruction, and then there's a stabilization process, which is another probably 6 weeks or so. So it's about a 9-week sort of cycle before we have behavioral change. And we can do this. We can drive this. We can drive that neuroplasticity and drive those changes in our brain with our mind. And our mind's got the messy part. I mean, it's so brilliantly explained. I'd love to talk a little bit about, in the Bliss brain, you talk about how we cultivate peak states and our brains rapidly rewire themselves for happiness. And you talk about how you love to meditate. And so before we dive into that, let's quickly just first talk about meditation and how not everyone can just close their eyes and meditate. You talk about your own experience when you were much younger, at 50, I think it was 15, when you had your first experiences of trying to find more meaning in life. So I'd love you to talk about meditation and how there's different ways of doing it that are easier for people. And then I'd love to talk about how you find that you spend those few hours and then you come back, and it's kind of hard to get back into the day-to-day stuff and business and team meetings. And, it's nice to stay in that beautiful bliss state, and why, but how we can use that to improve our daily life. So 3 parts to the question. How you got into, 2 parts, the meditation side and how it's good and how it's great, but how can some people battle with it, and then how the bliss states and how to sort of use that and to enhance our own lives.
Yes. And it's worth both reducing stress with techniques like EFT and building resilience, creativity, and joy with meditation. And I learned meditation when I was living on a spiritual community when I was a teenager, and I was really not in good shape when I was 10, 12 years old. I just wanted to get out of this world. I did not want to be here. And just a whole lot of things happened, and I just wanted to make an exit. I just couldn't bear the thought of living. And one day I was lying on my bed in absolute despair, and I suddenly had this extraordinary feeling that I was floating. I was floating in this sea of bliss, open space. It was empty space. It was full of light. it was this absolutely profound experience of the universe. Now, having read other accounts of this, and it's been described by Christian mystics, Sufi mystics, Jewish mystics, people of all the faith traditions, and they call it the void or the great silence. There are a number of names for it, but it's something that's a common mystical experience. It's actually that mystical experience is the pinnacle of all the world's religions and spiritual traditions. Usually somebody, the founder, whether it was Moses, whether it was Jesus going into the wilderness, whether it was Muhammad on his journey led by the archangel Gabriel through all the levels of heaven, they had this experience of the void. And then they come down and explain it to their followers, and things go from there. But I suddenly was in that place at 15 and drifting for a while, came back from that change. I came back knowing there was meaning and purpose and love and joy to be had. Nothing much changed about my outside life immediately, but at least I knew there was a place to go. It turns out that something like 70% of people, by the time they turn 20, have had some kind of what they call anomalous experience like that. So the majority of people actually are having these experiences. My response was to go and join a spiritual organization, study the perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, Ram Dass, Evelyn Underhill, all these great mystics. So I spent many, many years doing that. And I began to work on myself. Meditation was one of the things we learned. We learned energy healing. But meditation really was not satisfactory for me. The meditation master said, close your eyes, still your mind. And our minds are inherently meant to be active. So I can never still my mind. Then eventually I learned heart math. I learned EFT. I learned self-hypnosis. I learned biofeedback and neurofeedback. And one day I had this thought around 2008. I thought, what would happen? I was actually at a conference where all these practitioners of these various methods were touting how great their stuff was. And I thought, well, I know it's all great. What if I stacked it all on top of each other? I did EFT tapping, did some neurofeedback, did the heart coherence method, did self-hypnosis, did some mindfulness, like a layered cake, stacked them all on top of the other. And bingo, suddenly I was in this profound, deep state. I went up to this organizer a few months later and said, can I do this with all the members of the audience in this whole conference? And she said, okay. So I did it with a whole room full of people, watched them all come into heart and brain coherence as a group. And many of them came up to me afterwards and said, that was the first time in my life I've ever been able to hit the kind of deep meditative state I've been aspiring to. So I called it meditation. I put it free on the web. Thousands, millions of people have downloaded it now and used it. It's just
eco meditation.
And beautiful. It's really just a combination of all those things. So that was how I stumbled into it. And then if you are both using a evidence-based meditation technique like that and tapping, you get the best of both worlds.
That's incredible. I love that. I love the layered cake. I could just see it, and I could just see you taking the whole conference through that experience. And I'm aware of your eco meditation. And you've got, let's just for a moment, because I know people are thinking, I've got to do this. Where can people start learning to do eco meditation and EFT techniques? Where can they start learning that from you? And then we'll go into maybe I want to ask you a couple of other questions before we do an exercise.
So the quickest way in is just going to the website, Dawson, my name, Dawson Gift, G-I-F-T, DawsonGift.com. And you download the free EFT mini manual, and you'll find all the tapping points on the last page. In fact, just open to the last page. Just use the last page on anything that's bothering you now. Again, you'll do that 0 through 10 test, and you'll know if it's working right away. If you're worried about a future event coming up, if you're worried about a physical disease, if you have a headache or pain, just try that. Just download it at DawsonGift.com, turn to the last page, and tap. Without any preparation or training, you'll see what happens. And people tend to have a reasonable amount of reduction in their symptoms the very first time. Also at DawsonGift.com is a free eco meditation track, which I really recommend because that track has been shown in a clinical trial to produce rapid remodeling of two parts of the brain. One is the part of the brain that holds us in suffering, and the other is the part of the brain that has to do with compassion. It dials up the compassionate activity in the brain. It dials down the suffering part. And that meditation is at DawsonGift.com too. So go there, give it a try, and you're likely to feel it in your body right away.
That's incredible. So that's something they could. So the eco meditation, that's the layered cake. So just so everyone knows about that. It's in that it's the layered cake. I love the. I've got the cake in my head now. So that's beautiful. Okay, wonderful. Now, one of the things that you say a lot in your work and your books. Okay, no, first we didn't cover. Let's cover the bliss point, the chemicals with the bliss point. Let's talk a little bit about that. How that the anandamide and whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that bliss point a little bit more?
Yeah, I really got curious about these neurotransmitters in 2018 because in 2017, in October, I had a shattering event. And at midnight, just after midnight on October 9th, 2017, my wife shook me by the shoulder and said, something's really wrong. And I ran outside and there was this wildfire just sweeping down toward our house. We live in Northern California where there are a lot of wildfires. And we had just a few moments to throw on some clothes, the car keys, sprint to the car. As we drove out, all the tree branches were catching a line above our heads.
Oh my gosh.
It was a nightmarish experience. We just got out. Many of our neighbors died.
I'm so
5,000 people lost their homes. It was just the beginning of this dislocation for the whole county because so many people were homeless and there wasn't any space for them. All the deaths, all the disruption. It took many, many years to rebuild. And so what I was doing, like the next morning, I woke up, we checked into a hotel right away, many, many miles away. I woke up the next morning, I realized I have to meditate right now because I'm so dysregulated. And I did that, Caroline. And as I meditated, I felt myself just dropping back into my body. I became calm. And I suddenly shifted dramatically with meditation. I'd been meditating at that point every single day for over 20 years, because again, using meditation, using other forms of meditation, I knew how to do it at that point. I built this resilient brain. And so the next year, which was a horrendous year for other reasons, we lost our life savings after the fire. We lost, of course, all our possessions. Our house was burned to the ground. In the middle of all these losses, I'd sit there and meditate. And I would feel happy, healthy, abundant, prosperous, and in ecstasy. And some of my friends thought I was nuts. They thought I was in denial. How can this guy be sitting there ecstatic after he's lost absolutely everything?
Wow.
I began to get into anandamide. What is anandamide? The bliss molecule we find in the brains of monks and nuns and mystics. And you just wind up having huge amounts of the bliss molecule sloshing around in your brain with meditation. And it's the same molecule that is active in THC, the molecule in marijuana. It docks on the same receptor sites in the brain. This is called the body's endocannabinoid system, internal cannabinoids. So we have external cannabinoids like marijuana, we have internal cannabinoids like anandamide, and they are incredibly pleasurable. Serotonin is just like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, docks with the same receptor sites as psilocybin. Same thing with dopamine. Same thing with nitric oxide. So I was sitting there in the mornings in meditation, and I was in ecstasy, despite the fact that my world had just
fallen apart
around me. And so I began to read about this, write about it, and I wanted to share this with people. And that's where the book Bliss Brain was born. I actually wrote Bliss Brain the year after.
Oh my gosh!
We're actually in the middle of this utter disaster that destroyed everything. So we can be happy, and it has nothing to do with external circumstances. It has nothing to do with it, whether you have money, whether you own a house, whether you're in a disaster. We are resilient beings and we can find joy. We can tune into the grace of the universe and we can hook up with all of consciousness and be in that state of bliss, regardless of what's going on around us. So the book Bliss Brain is what grew out of that. And then these neurochemicals, I mentioned a few of them earlier, they make you feel absolutely fantastic. And the other thing about them is they are highly addictive. If you have that dopamine and serotonin and anandamide in your brain, high levels of it, dopamine, that pleasure neurochemical, again, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, all of these things recruit the dopamine response in the body and the brain. When you meditate, your dopamine can rise 65%.
Wow.
You're getting it's like mainlining. I mean, you're getting this
with no side effects.
Neurochemicals.
With no side effects, yeah.
Yeah, and so you want to do it again and again and again and again and again. and your brain just gets used to being in these blissful states, and you just go from being wherever you were to being in ecstasy pretty much all the time.
Wow, that's just, I'm just, wow. That's beautifully explained. I've read about this research for years, and yet when you explain it, it just all comes to light. And wow, I'm sorry you went through all of that. And thank you for turning that into something that we can all learn from. Okay, I'd love to get into a tapping exercise, but just before we do, I know you need about 10 minutes for that. Would you just explain to people that tapping can bring up traumatic emotions and memories? And it's really good. You've got practitioners available. You've got an app. You've got all kinds of support for if people are doing this and things come up that they need help with. So would you mind just talking a little bit about that and then taking us through a tapping exercise?
Yeah. And so you want to be tapping on what bothers you. But if you have had a history, for example, of family violence, if you have PTSD, if you have persistent self-sabotage, then tap for things that are manageable and don't get into those kinds of memories. You want to work on it with a practitioner on that. If you go to dawsongift.com, you can download the free resources there. You'll find a link that says practitioners. Click there and find a certified clinical EFT practitioner, and that person can help you with those persistent problems. So if you're traumatized, don't just move ahead with EFT or any other therapy. Make sure you're working with a competent professional. But for most things that bother us, we can just use self-help, tap ourselves, and it works. So yeah, we'll do a little tapping exercise, and you'll feel the shift, not just in your body, but also in that numerical score, 0 through 10. And as we do this exercise, I want you to pick something that is manageable. Pick something that happened within the last 2 weeks. Don't pick something from a long time ago. Don't pick something from your childhood. That's what the practitioners are for. So pick something recent. And as you tune into whatever it is that's bothering you, that recent event, could have been a fight with a loved one, a dispute with a family member, a team member, could have been a disappointment you had, it could have been a financial loss. But again, make it a recent problem that you can remember. And then as you think about that, score it on a scale of 0 through 10. The 0 being no emotion, 10 being the maximum possible emotion. And then also just tune into your body. Think about the event and where do you feel that event lodged in your body. That's the energy part of this, and that's what's going to change. And then also give the event a name. So if, for example, it was a fight with my teenage daughter, then you can just call it the fight. If it was watching your retirement portfolio drop in value, just call it the portfolio. Just give it a little tag, a name that we can use for the tapping exercise. So write down your number and write down your title as well. Write it down on a piece of paper, write it down on your device. And we want you to write it down, both the number and the name, because we found people's numbers drop so quickly that they can't remember how big a deal that thing was to them 5 minutes before.
Okay,
so
I've just
drop quickly, and you may well forget how much that thing bothered you.
got it. I've done it already. I've written it down. I've given it a name. So everyone do the same thing.
Okay, don't give me your name, but Caroline, give me just your number.
I put a 10.
A 10. Okay, and this was in the last 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
And now, as you focus on the name, and what I'll do is I'm going to make a series of statements you can follow along with either verbally or in your mind. I'll just call it the event, and you'll think of the event and you'll give it your own name. So start by tapping over here on the side of your hand with the fingertips on the other hand. This is called the small intestine meridian, and it's where we start every tapping routine. And say either in your mind or out loud, even though I remember this bad event, I'm breathing now. I got through it. I'm safe now. I'm okay. This bad event, I wish it hadn't happened. It shouldn't have happened. Substitute the name of your own event. It did happen. And I came out the other side. I'm still okay. And my life is basically okay, despite the bad event. Again, focus on the bad event. Then also focus where in your body you feel that bad event and the emotional impact of the event. And notice your breathing. Notice there's nothing threatening your survival right now, even though you're thinking about this bad event. Now tap on the top of your head. This meridian runs all the way down the back of your body, your governing meridian, and just really focus on your name, your title for the bad event. Focus on that title, focus on your body sensation and the event while you tap. Take 2 fingers and tap where your eyebrow meets the bridge of your nose. You can tap one side, you can tap both sides. Keep your eyes open. Focus on the bad event. And again, we're changing the energy in the body, we're changing the energy in the brain when we do this, when we tap and release that negative tagging around the event. Tap on the side of your eyes. Focus on the event. Tap under your eyes. This is a really important point. This is where your stomach meridian ends, under the pupil of your eye. As you tap, focus on the event. Focus on your body. Notice your breathing. Think about the worst detail of the event. What was the single most emotionally triggering detail of the event? As you breathe, tap under your nose. Tap on your chin right below your lower lip. Focus again on the event, your title, your body sensation, and your breath. Tap right under your collarbone where it meets your breastbone, and you use all 4 fingers here. Feel your breath. Focus on the event. Notice you're safe. You got through it. And the event was really bad. And the worst part of the event was bad. Now cross your arms, just tap under your arms, about level with your elbows, with 4 fingers. Tap one more time over here, side of your hand. Focus on the name of the event. Now, stay with me here. I'm going to give you some complicated instructions. First of all, take a breath now and score your event again. Think about the event and see what your number is now. I'll do one more thing before we wrap this up, though. So your number has probably gone down. So maybe a 0, but it may not be a 0. It may have gone, say, an 8 to a 4 or a 7 to a 3 or something like that. So we're going to work on the remaining 3 now with those eye movements we use in different energy therapies. So you have your new number, write that one down, and we'll see if we can release that remaining emotional intensity with eye movements. Here you tap on the back of your hand, and then keeping your head steady. Don't move your head around, just keep it steady. Look all the way up at the ceiling. Think about the event. Look all the way to your right. Focus on your body sensation. Look all the way down. Think about the event. Look all the way to the left, not moving your head, eyes only. Look all the way up. Look all the way to the right. Focus on the event. Notice your breathing. Look all the way up again. The event. Look all the way to the left. Look all the way up again. And breathe deeply. And relax your eyes, stop tapping. Now, focus on the event again one last time and write down your final number. What number are you now? So write that down and just compare it to your first score. That's how energy shifts reality.
Wow. Amazing. And it's
What was
all
yours?
energy. Okay, so it's dropped to a 4 to a 5 from a 10. So
Okay.
it's a 50% drop, which is pretty good.
Yeah, do the eye movements later on, and you're likely to see a further drop.
Down,
Well,
drop further. Yeah, for sure. Oh, wow. Thank you. That was, I feel different though. I definitely feel different. And I've done this before. I've done you've gone through your course and everything. And it's just beautiful how it works. This really does work. There's so much more to cover. Where else can people find? Well, obviously your books are available everywhere where books are sold. What's a good place for people to start? Obviously get the gift and go to Dawson.at-gift and get these things, these resources. Maybe just summarize for people. What would be step 1, 2, 3? Next steps.
oh, that's a great question. Step 1, 2, 3. So yeah, step 1 is dawsongift.com. Download the manual, tap along with the diagram in the last page. The manual's only 60 pages long, so it's short. Download it at dawsongift.com and then use the last page and just try it out on something all by yourself without a practitioner. Then the meditation. Use the meditation tomorrow morning. Use it first thing in the morning. Meditation works best early in the morning. Wake up in the morning, do the meditation right away. It's free, it's downloadable there. Use it immediately. Then you'll see all sorts of other links are certified practitioners. You can go and make an appointment with one of them. Often the first session is free. It's powerful to have a knowledgeable person. And there is a vast amount of research on EFT. Click the research link and you'll find clinical trials for weight loss. People on average lose weight when they do a self-study course or work with a practitioner, and they keep on losing weight. When we track them 1 to 2 years later, the weight doesn't come back because they've had lasting behavioral change. So if you have a weight issue, if you have a relationship issue, a money issue, find a practitioner who specializes in that and work with them. Take an online course. We have one on anxiety. We have one on insomnia. Our insomnia one has been done now by over 10,000 people.
Wow.
And if you look at the comments on the website, it's a science-based course. It's really short. Each episode, 10 episodes, each episode is under 10 minutes long. So it's not a big investment of time. I think at the amount of money, it is something like $20 or $30. It's just dirt cheap. And we want this work in the hands of people. So we make all of our stuff as affordable as possible. And so you can go there and you can learn those solutions for insomnia, anxiety. And we have many online courses like that you can take. You can also take a live course. You can take a live workshop with me, one of our trained practitioners. That's an easy way to get into it. You really learn EFT thoroughly in a live, hands-on experience. Those are between 1 day and 4 days long. And finally, you get certified. And we have had thousands of people do this and say, wow, I want to do this for a living. And they make a great living as well because these practitioners are highly in demand because they are so effective. So we have practitioners working in the Cleveland Clinic and the Veterans Administration, at Johns Hopkins, many hospital systems, Kaiser Permanente, but a lot of independent practitioners, some of them part-time, some of them full-time. And we have a certification program. It takes a year. That's a rigorous program. Those workshops are accredited by the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association.
Wow.
Really solid science. So that's the final stage. You actually become a practitioner and then you learn EFT well, offer it to others. But also when you do that, your own health will change. We found that our practitioners have massive shifts. Their blood pressure drops an average of 8%. Their resting heart rate drops. Their cortisol drops an average of 35%. Their immune system improves dramatically. So all of these physiological changes happen to you while you are in the training program. So there's this whole range of things available all through that dawsongift.com link.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I was going to say the big wow there. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Wonderful. Such a great talk. Such a great interview. Thank you for everything you're doing. I'm so looking forward to part 2. part 3 and part 4 and whatever. And people just need to listen and listen to this again. Thank you, Dawson. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Life is meant to be a joy, and it's been a pleasure to share. Thank you.
Thank you.